There is a condition affecting more than 1 billion people on this planet right now. It has no single dramatic symptom. It rarely causes pain. It doesn't show up on the standard blood test most doctors order during a routine checkup, and yet it quietly and methodically lays the groundwork for type 2 diabetes, heart disease, Alzheimer's, infertility, certain cancers, and premature death. It hides inside the body for years, sometimes decades, wearing disguises so ordinary, so mundane, so easily explained away that most people never think twice about them. A little extra fatigue, some stubborn weight that won't move, a midday crash after lunch, dark patches of skin on the back of the neck. These are not random inconveniences. These are messages. And the message they are sending, the one almost nobody is trained to read, is that something fundamental has gone wrong with the most critical metabolic system in the human body. This is the story of insulin resistance and the signs you've been missing your entire life. To understand what insulin resistance is, you first have to understand what insulin does, because it does far more than most people realize. When you eat, your digestive system breaks carbohydrates down into glucose, which enters the bloodstream. Blood glucose rising is a signal. The pancreas receives that signal and responds by releasing insulin, a hormone whose primary job is to act like a key, unlocking the doors of your cells so that glucose can enter and be used for energy. In a healthy body, this system is a masterpiece of biological precision. Glucose rises, insulin rises, cells open, glucose enters, blood sugar normalizes, insulin falls. Clean, efficient, elegant. When this system is working, you barely notice it. Energy is steady, hunger is regulated, weight is stable, mood is even. The body hums along the way it was designed to. But something goes wrong, not suddenly, not dramatically. Gradually, imperceptibly, over months and years, the cells begin to stop responding to insulin's knock. The key is still there, the lock is still there, but something has jammed the mechanism. The cell doors don't open the way they should. Glucose stays in the bloodstream instead of entering the cells. The pancreas, sensing that blood sugar is not clearing properly, does what any system would do when its signal isn't being heard. It sends more insulin, higher and higher concentrations, trying to force a response. For a while, this works. Blood sugar stays technically normal. Standard glucose tests come back fine. The doctor says everything looks okay, but underneath that surface normalcy, something has already begun to break down. And the strain of producing all that extra insulin is slowly exhausting the very organ responsible for making it. This is insulin resistance, not diabetes, not yet, but the shadow that precedes it. The stage before the fall when the damage is being done, but the alarms haven't yet sounded. And here is the part that should make every person stop and pay attention. The average person lives with insulin resistance for 10 to 15 years before they are ever diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. 10 to 15 years in which their body is sending signals, clear, readable, biological signals, and almost no one is listening. So what are those signals? What does insulin resistance actually look like from the inside in the years before a diagnosis changes everything? The answer is hiding in plain sight, in symptoms so common they have become normalized, so universal, they have been absorbed into the background noise of modern life. Start with fatigue, not the tiredness that comes from a bad night's sleep or a particularly demanding week. A specific patterned fatigue, the kind that arrives reliably after meals, particularly after meals heavy in refined carbohydrates. You eat, and instead of energy following the food, a wave of exhaustion rolls through you. You fight to keep your eyes open. Your concentration dissolves. You reach for coffee, for sugar, for anything to counteract the fog that has descended. This post-meal crash, which millions of people have simply accepted as a fact of life, as just the way they are after lunch, is one of the earliest and most consistent signs of impaired glucose metabolism. When cells are resistant to insulin and glucose isn't entering them properly, the brain and body don't get the energy they need from the food that was just consumed. The crash is not weakness. It is a metabolic cry for help. Then there is the hunger. Specifically, a hunger that never quite feels satisfied, that returns insistently within an hour or two of eating that has a particular urgency and a specific craving profile. People with insulin resistance don't typically hunger for a piece of grilled fish or a bowl of vegetables. The cravings are for carbohydrates, for sugar, for bread, pasta, pastries, sweetened drinks. This is not coincidence. It is biology. When cells can't efficiently absorb glucose, the brain interprets this as a shortage, even when the bloodstream is swimming in sugar. So it sends the signal that has always worked: eat carbohydrates, get glucose, fix the shortage. And the person, responding to what feels like a completely natural hunger, eats the very foods that worsen the resistance, which deepens the hunger, which drives more eating, a biological trap that tightens with every turn. But the signs go even further, into the mirror, onto the skin, into parts of the body that seem entirely disconnected from blood sugar or metabolism. Take a moment to consider one of the most overlooked clues in all of metabolic medicine: a darkening of the skin in specific locations, on the back of the neck, in the armpits, in the groin, sometimes on the elbows and knuckles, a velvety brownish discoloration called acanthosis nigricans. Most people who have it either don't notice it or assume it is a tan line, or feel self-conscious about it without ever connecting it to anything medical. But this darkening is a direct biological consequence of high circulating insulin. Excess insulin stimulates the receptors in skin cells, accelerating their growth and causing them to pile up in the folds and creases of the body. When a doctor sees acanthosis nigricans, they should be immediately investigating insulin levels. When a person sees it on their own body, it is one of the most visually legible signs that their insulin has been running chronically high, often for years. Look at the skin elsewhere, and there is another sign, one so common it has an entire industry built around treating it without ever addressing its cause: skin tags. Those small, soft, benign growths that appear on the neck, eyelids, underarms, and beneath the breasts. Dermatologists remove them. Cosmetic products promise to eliminate them. Almost no one explains what they represent. But the science is clear and has been for decades. Skin tags are associated with elevated insulin levels. Like acanthosis nigricans, they are a response to chronic hyperinsulinemia, to the constant overstimulation of skin cell receptors by a hormone that was never meant to run this high, this continuously, for this long. A person who begins developing multiple skin tags in middle age, who watches them multiply over the years and thinks little of it, may be looking at one of the most persistent and consistent external markers of insulin resistance the body can produce. And then there is the brain. The connection between insulin resistance and brain function is one of the most troubling frontiers in modern neuroscience, and one of the least discussed in mainstream medicine. Insulin receptors are abundant throughout the brain. Insulin plays a crucial role in learning, memory consolidation, and the clearance of the amyloid plaques now strongly associated with Alzheimer's disease. When the brain becomes resistant to insulin, and emerging research suggests that insulin resistance in the brain can develop independently of insulin resistance in the body following its own timeline, the consequences are measurable and frightening. Difficulty concentrating, mental fog that sits like gauze over every thought, a loss of sharpness, of the ability to hold multiple ideas in mind at once, of the quick recall that used to feel effortless. These cognitive changes are so commonly attributed to stress, aging, and overwork that they almost never prompt an investigation into metabolic health. But some researchers now believe that Alzheimer's disease, the most feared and least understood of all neurodegenerative conditions, is in significant part a story of insulin resistance in the brain. They have even given it a name: type 3 diabetes. That name has not yet found its way into standard medical textbooks, but the research behind it is accumulating with a speed and consistency that is difficult to ignore. There is more. The connection between insulin resistance and hormonal disruption, particularly in women, is another chapter that most people are never given the opportunity to read. Polycystic ovary syndrome, or PCOS, affects an estimated 10 to 15% of women of reproductive age and is the leading cause of female infertility worldwide. For decades, it was understood primarily as a hormonal condition. characterized by irregular periods, elevated androgens, and the ovarian cysts that give it its name. But the science has shifted. The majority of women with PCOS have insulin resistance at the root of their condition. Excess insulin stimulates the ovaries to produce too much testosterone. It disrupts the hormonal signaling that governs ovulation. It creates the very hormonal chaos that defines the syndrome. Treating PCOS without addressing insulin resistance is, in many cases, treating the smoke without the fire. And yet, how many women have sat in doctors' offices for years, receiving treatments for the symptoms of PCOS, birth control pills, anti-androgens, fertility drugs, without anyone ever sitting down with them and explaining that the metabolic system at the center of this condition can be addressed directly and substantially through changes in how they eat, move, and sleep? This is perhaps the most painful thread running through the story of insulin resistance. How preventable so much of it is, and how rarely people are given the information they need to prevent it. Because the drivers of insulin resistance, the forces that jam the cellular lock and force the pancreas into overdrive, are among the most thoroughly studied factors in all of modern medicine. Diets high in refined carbohydrates and added sugars, chronic sedentary behavior, insufficient sleep. Studies show that even 4 consecutive nights of poor sleep can induce measurable insulin resistance in otherwise healthy individuals. Chronic stress and the cortisol it produces. Exposure to certain environmental chemicals, including the plasticizers and pesticides that have infiltrated the food supply at every level. These are not mysteries. They are not theories. They are documented, replicated, peer-reviewed facts, and they describe the texture of ordinary modern life with an accuracy that should stop us cold. Because this is not happening to other people. This is happening everywhere, to people of every age, every body type, every socioeconomic background. The young athlete who eats what he thinks is a healthy diet but drinks 3 sweetened protein shakes a day. The working mother who sleeps 5 hours a night for years because there is simply no other choice. The teenager whose entire diet has been built around processed food since before they could read. The thin, professionally successful person who has never been overweight a day in their life, but who lives on refined carbohydrates, works 80 hours a week, and has never once been tested for the condition slowly altering their metabolic landscape. Insulin resistance does not wait for obesity. It does not wait for a particular age or a particular lifestyle. It follows the conditions that create it, and those conditions are now universal. But this is also where the story pivots, because insulin resistance is not a sentence. It is a signal, and unlike so many of the diseases it eventually gives rise to, it is exquisitely, powerfully reversible. The same metabolic flexibility that allowed it to develop is the same flexibility that allows it to be undone. This is one of the most important facts in modern preventive medicine, and one that receives a fraction of the attention it deserves. Movement is perhaps the most immediate and powerful intervention available. Skeletal muscle is the largest consumer of glucose in the body, and when muscle contracts, it absorbs glucose through a pathway that bypasses insulin entirely. A 30-minute walk after a meal has been shown in studies to reduce post-meal blood glucose spikes by as much as 30%. Resistance training, lifting weights, performing bodyweight exercises, building and maintaining muscle mass increases the number of glucose transporters in muscle cells, making them more sensitive to insulin over time. The more muscle you carry and use, the more efficiently your body handles glucose. The more efficiently your body handles glucose, the less insulin it needs to produce. And the less insulin it produces chronically, the more the cellular machinery has the chance to reset, to respond, to come back online. Diet is the other pillar, not as deprivation, but as information. Every meal sends a signal to the metabolic system, and the nature of that signal shapes what the system becomes. Foods that cause rapid, dramatic spikes in blood glucose, the white bread, the sweetened beverages, the ultra-processed snacks engineered for palatability rather than nourishment, demand the largest insulin responses and drive the fastest progression of resistance. Foods that deliver glucose slowly and steadily, fiber-rich vegetables, legumes, whole intact grains, foods eaten in their least processed form, allow the system to function with the precision it was designed for. Protein and fat, which cause minimal glucose response, allow meal composition to be structured in ways that quiet the metabolic alarm system rather than trigger it. This isn't a fad. It isn't an influencer's protocol. It is the application of basic biochemistry to the choices we make 3 times a day, every single day of our lives. And sleep, the intervention that costs nothing and that the modern world has declared expendable, turns out to be one of the most non-negotiable factors in insulin sensitivity. The hormonal architecture of a well-rested body is categorically different from that of a sleep-deprived one. Growth hormone, which is released predominantly during deep sleep and which plays a crucial role in maintaining insulin sensitivity, is suppressed by poor sleep. Cortisol, which promotes glucose release and worsens insulin resistance, is elevated by it. The math is simple and brutal. You cannot fully address insulin resistance while chronically underslept. The biology will not allow it. Go back to that person standing in a doctor's office, being told their blood work looks fine. Their fasting glucose is 94 Wassers, within the normal range. Their standard cholesterol panel shows nothing alarming. They are sent home reassured. But their fasting insulin, the number that would directly reveal how hard their pancreas is working to keep that blood sugar technically normal, was never measured. The skin tags on their neck were noted and dismissed. The fatigue after meals was attributed to stress. The dark patch at the back of their collar was never mentioned. And so they leave, reassured, with no idea that their body has been trying to tell them something urgent for years in the only language it has, the language of symptoms, of skin, of cravings, of crashes, of a fog that rolls in every afternoon like clockwork. The tools to read that language exist. The science to understand it is decades old. The interventions to reverse it are accessible to almost everyone. What has been missing, what has always been missing, is not the knowledge. It is the conversation. The moment when someone sits across from a person and says, "These symptoms you've been living with, these small inconveniences you've normalized, these things you've blamed on getting older or working too hard or not having enough willpower, they are not random. They are connected. They are telling you something. And if you listen to them now, if you act on them now, you have the power to change the story that your biology is currently writing about your future." That conversation should have started years ago, but it can start right now. And for the billion people carrying the invisible weight of insulin resistance through lives they believe are perfectly ordinary, it cannot start soon enough.